Thank you all for coming. Great looking crowd for the most part. I hope you're all here for the food because the speech isn't going to be that great. I got to be honest with you. I've been having a little trouble with it. So, okay. So what I want to do first, before we talk research, I want to do a little experiment. Now I know you all just sat down to eat. This will be painless. It won't take very long. But I need for everybody to stand up. I know, I'm making you work for your lunch already. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to clap enthusiastically, and I want you to make some noise. All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, you can sit down. See, that wasn't that painful. Now, I said this was an experiment. My theory or my hypothesis was that if I got my standing ovation out of the way early, that it would take a little pressure off the rest of the speech. And I got to tell you, I think it worked. It went swimmingly. Secondly, I made a bet with my wife this morning that I would guarantee I'd get a standing ovation. Check. And we further know that $5 still means something to me. Not only that, but being right with my wife. And third, I've got video evidence of the blessed event. Check, check, and check. All right. So we're going to get back to some serious stuff. We're going to talk about my research. And this was the research track that I did in my doctoral program at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And over a 4-year period, I was among one of the first researchers, as far as I know, to really do extensive research on the 2008 crash, both the national and the global economic crash. And so I did, over a 4-year period, a qualitative, a quantitative, and a mixed methods study. And I interviewed both qualitatively and quantitatively over 450 participants in this study. And at least half of whom had lost jobs during that 2008 crash. So I kind of compared and contrasted, and I really looked at these folks to try to figure out, some folks did better, some folks did great, some folks not so great, and to kind of compare and contrast and see the types of things that made a difference. My study was actually inspired by a family member of mine, a brother-in-law who'd lost his job at the age of 50. And I kind of counseled him through that, and it really dawned on me that, boy, you start losing jobs in these later years and it gets tricky in a hurry. And then I unwittingly became the subject of my own research in the last 3 to 4 years as our company struggled, and we were kind of forced to the exits in our industry, had to sell our business, and at the ripe old age of 59, I'm out on the job market looking for a job and looking at different things too. So I kind of became a little bit of the subject of my own research track. Now my next steps, which is what I'm doing right here, is trying to get out and disseminate this and try to get this research out. You might have noticed I changed the title a little bit from what was marketed. This is actually the 6th evolution succeeding in the era of exponential change and hyperconvulsive environments. This is actually the title of the book that I'm writing. I'm going to hopefully be done with it by the end of the year, and I'm going to really try to get this out to a broader audience as much as I can at least. So, what were the goals of this study? First of all was to identify historic and recent events and examine how they helped contribute to current environment and situation that we face. Envision a possible future economic, social, and cultural landscape. Provide enough lead time for individuals to acclimate and adapt to these new realities. Highlight a framework and provide a roadmap for surviving, even prospering in such environments. And highlight suggested possible fixes and resets to the systems and processes that tend to lead us down these untenable pathways. My target audience for this research, students, early and mid-career adults, even late career adults, folks that might be approaching retirement, maybe looking at post-retirement options, different things like that. So basically everybody but toddlers and infants is kind of who I'm targeting this research. Pretty broad audience. Now, at this point, I'm going to unleash some razzle and dazzle on you. And Max is going to have a gold mine if I fall off of this on my keister. It's going to be an instant YouTube moment. So we're going to envision today, and we're going to position and prepare for a possible future. All right? Now, as with economics and as with the weather, the higher up we get and the further out we look, the fuzzier things get. So I'm not saying this is the absolute possible future, but this is a possible future. In fact, it's a future that we hope will not present itself. Nonetheless, it's a future that we likely need to prepare ourselves and our careers for. And furthermore, it's a future that we're already seeing a preview of coming events. So the characteristics of this potential landscape are hyper-convulsive shifts in social, cultural, political, and economic environments, massive and fast-paced shifts in how we work, live our lives, and interface with each other and technology, increased consolidation and ownership of major companies and key industries, giving corporate interests greater leverage and control over people's lives and prospects, bitter political landscapes that put the interests of political parties and structures ahead of the people and electorates that they are supposed to be working for, massive shifts in public spending and government resource availability as we move towards ever increasing amounts of debt and deficits and unfunded liabilities, and increasing fluctuations in how we spend money as younger generations struggle with higher levels of debt and decreased earning potential, and an era where many information and news sources are compromised and even suspect. Many people are calling this the post-truth society, an era. What are some current examples of all of this? Political divide, candidates becoming more extreme due to primary system and apparatuses and ideological divides, increased money and influence in politics and their structures via the Citizens United ruling in 2010, which opened the floodgates to corporate interest in any number of things, leading to scorched earth and take no prisoners battles in both D.C. and in state capitals, and the undoing, obliteration of previous administrations' policies and achievements with changes of presidencies. The social and cultural divide dominating the landscape, wedge issues such as gun, abortion, gay marriage becoming more prevalent, major health outbreaks due to globalization, restricted access to adequate health care, and even overuse of antibiotics, historic levels of debt and deficits nationally in many regions of the world, fast-moving shifts in major industries due to technology, artificial intelligence, and globalization, and convulsive shifts in major segments due to catastrophic issues, major players, and over-consolidated industries. Aircraft and agriculture, my industry would be an example of that. And substantial global trade instability and the resultant convulsions in business climate. So those are some of the current day examples and omens that we're kind of seeing at this time. Now I will come down back to Earth. Da-da. All right, so let's look at the definition of the word evolution. It's the gradual development of something, especially from a simple to more complex form. Seems like a logical definition, right? Well, there's only one problem with this definition, is it's changed. Things aren't quite so gradual anymore. Things are moving at a really, really fast clip. What I'm going to look at is the 5 evolutions. And then we'll look at what I think we are in right now, which is the 6th evolution. The 5 evolutions are mobility and migration, industrialization, globalization, financial and technical sophistication, and the great divide or the polarization. Now, one thing I want you to take heed of is these are not in lockstep. One isn't over and the other one begins. These are all going on simultaneously. We're spinning all 5 of these plates and even the 6th one simultaneously, and that's what builds the complexity. The first evolution, mobility and migration, as much as we'd like to think this is somewhat of a recent phenomenon, it isn't. It isn't. It's historically controversial, it's perceived as threatening and unfair, and it has been through the ages. It's brought about by necessity, ambition, and opportunism. We as a human race refuse to be constrained. We're going to spread our wings, we're going to spread out. It's currently a heightened controversy regionally, nationally, and globally, and its cataclysmic political, environmental, and societal shifts continue to make an attractive option for large segments of the population. So this gets increasingly popular due to some of the events that surround us. The second evolution, industrialization. This has been going in one form or another for hundreds of years, but again, due to mechanization, it's really gotten ramped up and it's really moved much faster. Movement of population and workforces from country to city, from farms to factory. Movement of work from the physical to the sedentary, bringing obesity as a health crisis into the forefront. And the speed of innovation, which presents incredible opportunities and challenges. Balance of stakeholder needs, historically difficult to balance, and it's not going to get any easier, just more complex between stockholders, customers, activists, and communities. And facilitated by the following, we're going to talk about globalization. What facilitates globalization? What's made it? Because globalization, if you think about it, is a fairly recent phenomenon. Yeah, we've had global trade, we've had some forms of it, but true globalization, what we're dealing with right now, it's 20, 25, 30, 50 years tops, right? And what's facilitated it? Ambition, technology, travel, communication, natural migration, and forced migration. And then just general needs, safety, security, and economic. The fourth evolution, financial and technological. The exponential growth of the financial sector and the utilization of technology, which in many ways I think helped facilitate the 2008 economic crisis. Some of the instruments, some of the technologies that came about, facilitating growth in finance, travel, communication, as well as technological integration into our lives, cultures, and societies. Facilitates the recent widespread usage of debt and credit instruments. Again, much like globalization, the widespread use of debt and credit is a fairly recent phenomenon, especially at the levels that we use it today, especially the accessibility that we have with it today. And the utilization of increasingly complicated and sophisticated financial tools, and many of them, part of the things that brought about the collapse in 2008, frankly, we had financial analysts and we had mathematicians that created formulas that were from that wall to that wall long, and there's only a handful of people on the globe that understood them. And somehow they convinced us all that we had invented a way to eliminate risk. And their models were obviously not workable, and they ended up costing us a lot along the way. More widespread use of technology and artificial intelligence to supplant traditional production and service delivery models, which are going to be pretty exciting for us going forward and challenging. And then we get to the Great Divide, and this was on full display the other night with the State of the Union. And it's been on full display for about the last 3 to 6 months. Increasing polarization of social, cultural, economic, and political structures. The evolution of the professional politician, and by that I mean somebody who comes out of college, who does politics their entire life and never has another occupation. And which is facilitated by big money, as I said, the Citizens United ruling, and the prioritization of political parties over national interests, and ideological divides and loyalties both U.S. and globally. growing supply of media companies that are willing to feed this divide for personal, political, and even financial reasons, and the move to the movement from time of abundance to a time of scarcity. I think in governments we're starting to see that shift already to where there's not as many goodies to disperse, and wealth and income divergence. And then the movement and the divide between cities versus rural, between coastal versus inner U.S., between educated versus uneducated. Now this gets us to the sixth evolution, and this is the one that I think we're emerging into right now, and this is what's really happening all around us as we speak, and that's living in an age of exponential change and convulsive environments. Globalism, drivers of this new landscape, globalism, debt and credit utilization, technology, mass communication, and even social networking, the polarization that I spoke of, the age of professional politicians and big money in politics, moving from a landscape of abundance to scarcity, mass migration events, extreme climate events, and generational tensions. Now, what I would ask of everybody, let's not be too rough on ourselves, all right? Because we were destined to hit this wall. We were absolutely destined to hit this wall. If you think about everything that's come together, this convergence of events that's come together that we've all had to deal with, and it's happening so fast, it's really, really very difficult to deal with. And so we have a continuation of the technological growth. We have current political structures, if you think about it, that are 200, 250, 300 plus years old, that are very ill-equipped to deal with 21st century problems. Our founders were brilliant people, but they didn't fully understand some of the things that we have on our horizon in this day and age. A federal government structure that has insufficient substantive constraints on borrowing. There's no federal balanced budget amendment. And economies and political structures that are addicted to near zero interest rates. Near 0% interest rates, which force near retirees and retirees into equity and the stock market, which are riskier investments instead of being able to keep their money in more safe and secure investments. And then a rapid move to globalized environments and structures. Now, as a result of all of this, it's likely going to be painful. There's going to be probably some difficult choices to be made, and there's going to be winners and losers in all of this. And the problem is, the winners and losers are likely to be determined by politics and power versus fairness and impartiality. Those proposing the solutions that will adequately deal with such problems in many ways are going to look like monsters, because some of these choices are not going to be great, and they're going to be degrees of loss in some cases. And ultimately, we'll probably lack the will to deal with these problems until it's way too late, and we may be approaching that point right now. And we'll spend too much time trying to deflect and affix blame rather than working together to fix problems and find solutions. This is a quote from David Brooks, New York Times columnist. He's a regular on Meet the Press. And luckily I DVR'd this and I reversed and I got back and I kept going and going until I knew I had this quote captured and absolutely right, and I'm going to read it to you. The big lie in this whole thing is that we've got this sensible country with a dysfunctional Washington. The reality is we have a country of people who want to bankrupt their children and grandchildren to spend money on themselves, and they will punish any politician who prevents them from doing that. Whoa. That's tough to look at. Right? That's tough to hold a mirror up a little bit. Now, whether you agree with that or not, there is a grain of truth in it for sure. Now, some people will tell me, and believe me, don't kid yourself, even in my family some people call me Chicken Little because I'm always saying the sky is falling, okay? But some people will tell me, oh Larry, you're worrying about too much and you're worrying about things you shouldn't be. Our economies are resilient. We'll get through this. Look at 9/11, look at 2008, look at all the things we've been through. Our economies are resilient and we'll get through all that. And you know what? I agree with them 100%. 9/11, almost water off a duck's back. Not to minimize the pain and suffering, but we pounded through that. 2008, we eventually recovered. But you know what happens in that process? Is how many subsectors, how many small groupings of industries, how many regions, how many individuals get left behind and crushed in the wake. That's what doesn't make the news, folks. Okay, the economy's fine. The global economies, the national economies, we weather through. But what happens to the individuals? Those are the individuals that I interviewed in my study. Those are the interviews that I heard from. And I'm telling you, I finished my doctorate in 2014, and I about guarantee you there's still some of those people that have not recovered, that are still probably suffering because it did that much irreparable damage. They may have gotten jobs back, they may be underutilized, they may be underpaid, or they may have lost 3 or 4 years before they got jobs back, and it irreparably changed their life, all right, and their retirement plans, things like that. So it's the individuals and small subgroups that tend to get lost in this picture a little bit. So, how we and future generations deal with these opportunities and challenges presented and highlight in my presentation today, that's what they're going to write countless history books about for the next 1,000 years. I will guarantee it. This is our time. This is our challenge. This is going to be big one way or the other, and we're going to have to figure it out. Now, I have dumped a lot on you in about 20 minutes, all right? I know you got to be thinking, holy crap, what did I come to this thing for, all right? Pretty intense, but the good news is we're going to transition and we're going to move on, all right? And I'm going to tell you how we can kind of position our lives and our careers, and we can kind of position ourselves to be in a better shape and to get through and maybe even be able to do well in times like these. But before we do that, I have to kind of hit the reset button with you. I put you through a lot in 20 minutes, so I got to be able to kind of hit the reset button with you a little bit. I got to help you find your zen. I got to help you find your happy place, all right? That's going to be a little difficult, so I'm going to loan to you today the thing that always works for me. And it's not yoga. It's not my Peloton bike. It's not any number of things like that. There's one thing that always knocks me out of a funk and that always makes me feel better, always. That right there does it for me almost every time, all right? Now, despite the fact that we can all kind of see what's going on, there's some little subsets in this picture that I want you to pay just a little bit of attention to. First of all is Miss Allison, who's taking the picture. And you can tell on the look on her face, this is just another day in the neighborhood, which kind of makes you wonder what kind of insane asylum we run on the second floor of that building, right? And then, I don't even know how to describe what the heck's going on with Angie in that picture. We'll just kind of move on from that. And then notice Therese. Look at the seething look on her face, the radiating hate and discontent that's being thrust my way in the dinosaur head. Well, unfortunately, a couple of days after that, it came home to roost, and I had to spend time in the hole. And would you look at Assistant Deanie Meanie face right there? Is that like, that's almost as horrifying as the presentation that I just gave. So, anyway. All right, so well, anyway, I hope I got you back a little bit, all right? So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how we can position ourselves moving forward, and this is where the model, this is where the stuff and all of these interviews I did, all of this time I spent with folks, this is where all of this stuff that kind of bubbled up. I started seeing commonalities, and I started comparing and contrasting the people that kind of got through things better and the folks that didn't, and I started noticing groupings of things that really seemed to make the difference. And that's what I call the Promethean framework. And Prometheus is the Greek demigod that's kind of known for, he was a fan of humanity, a huge fan of humanity, but he was also noted for his expansive, his overreach. And he ended up paying pretty dearly for some of that overreach and trying to really push the limits and expand things too much. And so he ended up paying a little bit of a price for that. These are the key components and factors that I identified that really made a huge difference in people's ability to weather times such as these ups and downs, which I think will be maybe more of the landscape with our current age students and college students, and maybe even be more compressed than they've ever been. And first was ability to adapt. Second was persistence and consistency of effort. Career timeline, and I'll talk about all of these in a little bit. Lifelong learning and skill development. Physical vibrancy. Relational and network quality. Risk management and financial management practices, and also career management. So what the research showed and why it made a difference in lives and careers. First was the adaptability to understand the deck had changed, and possibly forever, and to be able to move on and move forward within that new reality. Secondly, is these people that succeeded and that got through this, they answered the bell every day and they kept on working, they kept on moving, they kept on fighting for better outcomes. Next was people who kept their skills current and relevant, made the best and most timely adjustments. And physical vibrancy made the difference, maintaining the energy, enthusiasm, and stamina to keep working towards solutions. I'll never forget what one career placement person said, and she was looking at me when she said that, so I'm not sure what she meant by it, but she said, "Larry, there are 50-year-olds, and then there are 50-year-olds." I'm thinking I was the not so desirable version of that 50-year-old, I'm not sure. But what she was saying was there are people that have really vibrant, and they're positioned and they've got a really vibrant landscape when they're that age, and other people are a little more tired, a little more hung out to dry, a little more rode hard, put away wet. I mean, that's what she was saying. And so this physical vibrancy was a real key in this. Family and community made the difference. The depth and breadth of network made the difference. Talk about strong tie, weak tie relationships. And I cannot tell you the number of times I heard this statement. It was the person that I would have never anticipated or predicted that made the most impact in me getting my life back together. People would say, "I don't know why they took such an interest. I didn't think we were that close. It amazed me how much interest they took in my situation." So that's why having these broad networks can help. The ones that manage their risks by positioning their lives for more than one potential reality. So things like savings, insurances, retirement, education can play a real key in that. And then the people who manage their careers for the long term, thinking multidimensionally about their career moves and their positioning. So some people would take lateral moves. Some people I even talked to that even took downward moves to get a little bit more experience and position themselves a little better in the organization and make themselves a little more valuable to the organization. This is the actual Promethean tool, and by the way, I've got about 11 copies over here if anybody would like to take a look at it and take the survey and the instrument. I will warn you, this is a little clunky right now. It's still in its kind of stages of development. Over the course of this next year, I'm going to try to refine it and hopefully get it in a little better shape, but it's not too terribly bad right now. But this is actually the survey that I did with my quantitative study. So, in more or less in that form. So it's a scale of 72 questions, and all of these different areas that you see in these different colors up here are smaller scales. So you get a score for each one of those areas, and then it comes down to a cumulative score, which is the Promethean Life and Career Score, or your Convulsive Economic Quotient, which the higher that score is, shows you that you're better positioned to be able to survive and thrive in more convulsive environments. So the findings of the research and how to position lives and careers for this new reality, potential reality. First of all, take care of yourself physically as much as you possibly can. And I know this is an inexact science. You can exercise, you can do all the right things, and still fall over someday. But take care of yourself as best you can, because I suspicion there won't be enough government to go around, and healthcare, despite what everybody says, probably not going to get cheaper anytime soon. So the best way to manage your costs is to not have to go to the hospital. Okay? Now we all have to have some medical care, we all understand that, but as much as you can minimize that, probably the better. Take care of your finances, watch your debt levels. Hey, a lot of us have mortgages, there's some of us had student loans, some of our current students will have student loans. That's not necessarily all bad, but just as you can, when you get out and you get in the workforce, try to go to work and try to get that stuff knocked out and in a manageable position as quickly as possible. Work to be adaptable. This is a learned skill. Understand that significant changes will likely be part of the natural landscape. Be a lifelong learner. You can never know too much. You never be too educated. Plan to work longer. Retirement at 65 is a seriously flawed, broke societal model. And I don't even think it's good for us, folks. Here's what I tell my students all the time. Think of this like you do this. Okay? If you sit around and you don't work your muscles, what happens to them? They shrink, they atrophy, they decay. I think the same thing happens to your brain. All right? And so stay active, stay engaged, and like me, I'd always planned on doing a second act career in education. That's why I taught all these years in adjunct capacity, stuff like that. I didn't want to do what I'd done my whole career, the rest of my life. And most of us feel that way at times. But if you can do a second act career, you can find another pathway. That's nothing wrong with that. But I think we're going to need to work longer, even higher than what they say the mandatory retirement age is. I think it just is probably going to be mandatory for a lot of people. Manage your career. Entrepreneurial options may be a part of that. I teach entrepreneurial management quite a bit. One thing that does is that helps diversify your income stream. Become very good risk managers. Again, this is a learned skills, and there's lots of tools available. And develop and take care of your networks, both professional and personal. The bigger the networks you can get and the more tentacles you have out there, especially if you get into times where you have problems. You know, again, following up on what I said earlier, folks said that the people that were close to me didn't necessarily abandon me when I had those challenges, but they kind of just blended into the landscape in some cases, in many cases. But then it was these people, once again, that I would have never expected that kind of emerged and helped really get me back where I needed to be. And take care of your families and your communities. And the definition of family is changing around us. It's not necessarily Ozzie and Harriet anymore, right? So there's a lot of different types and forms of families, but it's people that have your back, people that you can depend on. And the same thing with communities. Look at Spirit right now with the Spirit Aerosystems thing. Look at the way Wichita's kind of rallying around, trying to pool resources, trying to find ways to help these folks. That's what communities can do. And a final thing and a final note on this slide is be sure to take care and multi-source your news sources and beware of compromised fake news and even altered artificial intelligence videos and some generally self-serving information and data sources. It's not that tough, all right? When you see something that looks a little bit too good to be true, a little bit sketchy, a little bit this, a little bit that, multi-source it. Go find other things and see if you can find out whether that's accurate or not. It's for your own peace of mind and also before you share stuff. I think it's never been more important. A future that we imagine and hope for. And this is kind of looking out on the horizon and trying to be more hopeful and maybe what we can put together. And I have confidence in the resiliency of our government. I have confidence in the resiliency of our nation. And this is what forms I hope it will start to take, is more accommodating political parties that understand that the needs of citizens eclipse those of the party. More relevant, adaptable, and applicable government structures, better to adapt to today's and future challenges. An evolved federal finance and constitutional structure that places percent of GDP limits and constraints on spending and borrowing. A better understanding of the role of governments and nations to protect existing citizens, but at the same time provide a balanced, compassionate assistance to those in need. A reckoning and understanding by individuals about what is truly important and needed in their lives. And I think this is where I feel like we've really kind of lost our way in some respects. And a better understanding that diversity is a strength and not a threat, whether it be generational, gender, or racial. National and global populations that understand that what we have in common is much more substantial than what divides us. Okay? Everybody focuses on these wedge issues and what divides us, but if you think about everything that we have in common, it far outweighs anything that divides us, and we just don't focus enough on that, I'm afraid. Now, the good news in all of this is twofold. First of all, the model that I proposed today and that I've showed you, none of this is rocket science. None of it. It's, in some ways, it's going back to the future. It's going back to some of the things that our parents and our grandparents told us at one time. None of this is hard to replicate, none of it's hard to duplicate. Just takes some discipline, takes some initiative. But don't kid yourself. When you're in environments like this, and there's a lot of up and down, there are tremendous opportunities that are going to be out there. And so the main thing you got to do is you got to try to make sure that you're positioned to take advantage and be in them. We're all going to be on the same white knuckle flight if my theories and my vision of the future is true. We're all going to be on the same white knuckle flight, and it's going to be bumpy and it's going to be somewhat terrifying at times. But if you've got yourself positioned right, you're going to be seat belted in. And it's still going to be a bumpy ride, but hopefully you're seat belted in, and at least you can stay in the game and stay whole in one capacity or not. So just to calm you down a little bit more, I threw in a basket of puppies even. All right? So trying to still hit our reset button. All right? Questions, comments? Anything I can answer? You all are in a state of shock, I can tell. I apologize what I've unleashed on you today.
Larry, am I kind of right to, there's 8 arrows there. I'm picturing myself as an octopus keeping 8 plates spinning, making sure these things are all running, right? Right. So always diligent on these key fronts, right?
Yeah, and the nice thing is this measurement tool here, if you answer that honestly, it should give you a pretty good read on where you stand and then be able to isolate the types of things you need to be working on. And this is also set up for students. The career management part of it has not applicable on all of those questions. So students are able to take it because obviously you may not have those career elements in your life yet. So it may not be quite as relevant, but it's still relevant and can be done with students as well. And I've kind of set it up that way. But yeah, hopefully, this gives you a decent read, this measurement tool. My goal is, and I'm going to try to find some resources to help me do this because I guarantee you I'm not smart enough. What I'd like to do is I'd like to get this thing to where it's web-based, to where people can take it, and to where it automatically calculates the score instead of you having to manually kind of calculate it. And I'm not clever enough to figure that out, so I got to try to find some people that can help me with that eventually. And then gather data and continue to gather data and continue to run statistics and try to, because all of this stuff I've got that I've run, I've shown significance, I've shown that there's correlations and there's ties with all this stuff, but it's still a relatively small set. And so I'd like to get this stuff live, I'd like to get it on the web, and I'd like to get a lot of people taking these tools and then and then I can put some environmental questions in there that kind of match up with their lives and what's going on in their lives, and then we can kind of run the statistics again and kind of correlate and see whether what I initially came up with is still kind of holding. The one thing that's nice about this study is it was such a convulsive event. You don't see those every day, and you don't have the opportunity to measure that every day. So that's what kind of helped. Yes?
Well, first you scared me to death.
Okay.
Okay. And then you presented that list that began with parties responding to citizen concerns rather than party interests. And that was kind of a promising list. So which one am I supposed to go for?
I will tell you this. I am an optimist by nature, and I'm optimistic. Again, I think our economies, I think everything's resilient. The problem is, if you look at our political party structures, if you look at a lot of our structures right now, it really does give me pause, because I think we're going to have to hit a lot of walls and back up and shake it off before we finally figure out the better ways that we're going to have to go. And I think we're going to have to feel more pain before we get to those pinch points. We finally start saying, okay, this isn't working. We're going to have to try some different things. We're going to have to make some different moves. I'm confident we'll get there eventually. One of the things I will say about this, and this is something that I figured out while I was at Harvard Business School, and 65% of the 160 students that were there were from outside of North America, and I got to be really good friends with all these international folks. I don't know why, I was this hick from Central Kansas, but they all seemed to like me and gravitate towards me. And I was having dinner with all these folks one night, and they were talking about the U.S., and I thought they were going to kind of really start bagging on us and stuff like that. And I was the one who was actually a little bit negative. And these folks said some things to me that I had never really thought about before. I said, do you guys think the world will come to our aid if we ever need it? And they said, absolutely. I mean, it was resounding. There's about 25 people at this table. It's a big round table at the top of the hub in Boston, okay? And they said, absolutely, Larry. And I said, well, why is that? They said, because there's never been another country like the United States of America. How many countries do you know that would go over to Kuwait, fight a war, get them their country back, and then give it back? How many countries do you know that will go around and fight for people's freedom, defend people from other interests? It's not a perfect system, it's not anything like that, but where else do you see that? And they said, look at history. You've never seen a time in history when you've had a country that has had such a power imbalance over the rest of the world that didn't try to dominate, decimate, and just destroy and subjugate everybody around them. And I really hadn't thought about it like that. So they basically said, yeah, we'll have your back. And we understand that you guys are funding an outsized cost of the world security apparatus. And that is one thing that Trump has said. And he has really banged that drum, is that more people need to come to the table and put more forward to help secure the world's future and the world's security. Whatever that figure is, and whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. But that's one of the things that he has definitely been trying to get done. So that really made me think, Larry. I'd never really thought about it from that perspective. But those folks were absolutely adamant about this. And they were pretty intelligent people. So, I mean, it made me think. So, any other questions or comments? Yes?
I'll just be a jerk.
That's all right.
So in terms of the prognosis of kind of where we stand, we're at the end of post-war world order, obviously. We're in what's called late capitalism, obviously.
Right.
In the era of globalization, although that word doesn't seem to have the same hopeful, tincture that it had 20 years ago when the book Empire came out. So just thinking about the buzzsaws that are bearing down on us from multiple directions, I would just point to two of them for you to think about,
okay,
to incorporate into your construct here about sort of our prognosis. And one of them is automation, obviously, and machine intelligence. So when you've got the recommendation that we no longer think about work ending at 65, and I totally agree. We got to stay active. My dad's almost 80, so he does the New York Times crossword puzzle every day, Sudoku. That's
right.
What we should do. But I do wonder about the world of work, and in terms of what automation is going to do to displace labor, and what it's already doing to displace labor, and that machine learning and algorithms. I think that none of us can really presume anything about what kinds of work we will be allowed to do or will be available for us to do. 5 years out, much less 10 or 20 years out. Second factor to think about is resource depletion and things like ocean acidification. And you've got climate change up there. I think there's a whole range of effects. And you're quite right, they're not going to land equally in all places. They'll be more traumatic in some than others, but I think that they're going to be local effects, and they're going to be ubiquitous. They're already kind of ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And the third thing to be really cautious of is epistemic. So, with these clinical results we've seen recently, and I don't know the exact citations here, but where evidence to the contrary of one's firmly held belief actually does not convince you of the wrongness of your belief, even if that can be demonstrated. It actually tends to reinforce, right, the fixity by which you hold on to the beliefs that you already have. And that's deeply problematic. And this is part of the whole information architecture of our world, the whole fake news thing, the whole deep fakes. It's an epistemic problem, and I honestly, as a philosopher, am quite confounded by this. And I see this as about a 4,000-year-old problem that is now exponentially worse. And so thinking about that then in terms of convulsive environments and the capacity for misdirection and the capacity to keep a lie going and going and going and going, it's very discomforting. So those are my three flies in the ointment here.
Only thing I would take issue, and I agree with you 100% on everything that you said, that I don't see them as flies in the ointment. I may have not. I may have not been as prominent in what I'm saying in terms of what you're talking about, but all of that's in there.
You said you're an optimist, and I'm.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. There's the old saying, I'm an optimist because I have to be, right? Sometimes we have to be, right? But I agree with you on all fronts. I mean, this automation, artificial intelligence, the future of work, there are some very, very smart people out there, from Hawking's to Tesla to all sorts of folks out there that are sounding the alarms. The only thing I find ironic is that a lot of the people that are sounding the loudest alarms are a lot of the people that are taking us headlong into the future they're sounding the alarms on, which seems almost a little hypocritical to me, but I'm not going to go there. And you know, as far as the climate, resource depletion, things like that, you know, I talked about resource scarcity versus we've gone through this really halo potentially of a time where, you know, all this convergence of just things came together and we had just seamless resources, right? Seamless resources. Well, that's where I think that's going to kind of maybe click over. Now, you know, I don't know that for sure. You know, maybe we'll you know, renewable energies, you know, we found a whole new source of fossil fuels in the U.S., whether that's good or bad. So maybe we'll figure it out. One thing I am optimistic about is I do think that we've got incredible potential in terms of the intellect and the intuition and just the resourcefulness we have out there. I think there's a lot of incredibly sharp people that necessity is the mother of invention. And so I think we will figure this out, but I come back again to the point, I think from a macro level, we'll figure all this out and I think we'll get through it, but what happens underneath that surface? You know, how many people can we get retrained and how quickly can we get them retrained as we go into this era? Look at taxi cab drivers, you know, these driverless cars, you know. I got some really good friends that I made in my trips to Cleveland and back that were taxi cab drivers, wonderful, wonderful people that may be obsolete in the next 10 years, you know? What happens to them, you know? So, I don't know, we got a lot to figure out, we got a lot to unpack. But no, I'm totally with you on what you're saying though, and yeah, there's just a lot to balance in all of this for sure. Any other questions or comments? Yes?
In your experience giving the survey that you've developed, about how many of these areas are people kind of strongish in and kind of weakish in?
You know, it's a good point. There were people that obviously that had a portfolio of skills. Think of it like an equalizer on a stereo, right? You get the sound just right, and this one's a little higher and that's a little lower. Well, that's the same way it is with that. Not everybody's going to be a 10 in all of these categories, right? So I think the biggest thing is what does your final number come up to? You know, if it comes up 80% or better, you're probably good. But it still doesn't mean that you don't want to pay attention to some of the areas that you might be a little bit weak on, maybe try to shore those up. But yeah, all of the people that I talked to, there were some people that didn't do a really good job of keeping up with their education, but they had rock solid family and friends. And I mean, those folks were just there, they helped them, you know, that made all the difference. You know, so it can be this portfolio. It doesn't mean every area's got to be 100% strong, but you got to have that balance in there. Good question.
And you said you did this with,
Yeah.
With 50-year-olds and older? Is that right? Is that what you said?
Well, no. The survey I did, I interviewed folks all up and down the spectrum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you find any differentiation between generations.
Yes, big differences. One of the things that I gave my brother-in-law advice on when he called me, like you say, he was about 51 years old. He'd lost a job he'd had for about 25 years. And when he called me, here's the advice I gave him. His name was Clyde. And I said, Clyde, you've got 6 months to make the market. And by that I mean kind of define where you want to be, define what you want to work, the type of job, the money you want to make, things like that. But you got 3 to 6 months to kind of make the market. At your age, if you haven't got a job within 6 months, you got to go find the market. Okay? You got to go find it. Because if you're over 50 and you get over a year without employment, boy, the numbers get ugly. They get ugly in a hurry. So that was the advice I gave him. Part of my journey on this was to try to help figure out whether I was giving him sound advice or not, whether I was kind of leading him down the right pathway or not. But I think I was. An interesting thing he did, though, is that mess down in Louisiana, was that Exxon, the pipeline, or was it Exxon? Anyway, but when they had that big pipeline, BP maybe, but when they had that big pipeline thing, he went to work down there. He'd been out of work for about 6 months, and he went to work down there, and he did that for about 3 months, where he was there 3 weeks, and then he was off 3 weeks, and they'd fly him back and forth. Well, you know what I figured out through that period is he was able to hit the pause button on the clock. And not only that, but the people that he would interview with, he was able to talk to them about his experiences and what he was doing, and they got to see, wow, this guy's a go-getter. You know, he's not going to be somebody who's going to lay down on you. But his situation was exactly what I was talking about there. He had a gal that had worked for him 20 plus years earlier that he had completely lost track of. And somehow she found out he had lost his job, and this woman reached out to him. She was pretty high up in an organization now. She had a really good network, really good LinkedIn network, had a lot of good contacts, and she worked tirelessly to get him that job. And he told me that same exact thing. He said, Larry, I don't know why she took such an interest in me. I don't know why she felt like it was so important to try to help me. I guess she liked working for me. I'm not sure what it was, but I'll never be able to thank her enough. So, you know, again, those networks, those weak tie relationships sometimes can really pay off a lot more than we'd think. Okay? Yes?
I have a question. So I was thinking about 2 points that you mentioned earlier, ability to adopt and taking care of finances. And I was thinking about 2 very famous American authors who are Francis Scott Fitzgerald and Charles Bukowski. They're both very famous, but they have different journeys. And the first one, Francis Scott, he got already successful after school years, after college years. And for Charles Bukowski, it was absolutely different. At one point, he didn't have any job. He didn't have any apartment to live in. He had problems with finances. But both of them achieved their dreams and started publishing their works. And I have kind of struggles with it because I know what I want to do. I want to be in fashion industry, but right now I do not have financial support from my family, and right now I have to work on campus and do sometimes what is not helping me to achieve my goals, so it stops my journey, but at the same time I need to take care of my finances. So what would you recommend me to do to not forget what I want to achieve, but at the same time not to be absolutely broke, moving towards my goal?
Okay, couple things. One is, always remember this. Broke is a temporary condition. Poor is a state of mind. Okay? So we've all been broke at some point. We all struggle with that. Sometimes you got to live to fight another day. Sometimes you got to take care of the short term, and you got to get through the short term. But most importantly is don't lose track of your larger goals. Okay? Try to always keep your eye on the ball. Now, If you're having to do some work and you're having to do some work in some areas that you don't, maybe you can get part-time work with companies that might take you a little closer down your pathway in fashion. Maybe you can get part-time work in the evenings or weekends or things like that. Even if it's not even the best paid stuff, something that kind of keeps your leg in that. I always wanted to be an academician eventually. That's why I always taught part-time, even though my life didn't lend itself very well to being a full-time, obviously. I always kept my leg in the game. I always kept my foot in the game. So try to always keep that in mind. You got to take care of the short term. There's nothing wrong with that, but always keep your eye on your longer range goals. Keep them written out, keep them before you, and always try to be looking at every month, every 3 months, what am I doing in one form or another to make this happen. Okay? Hey, it's 1 o'clock. I better shut this down. Thank you all for your attention. Appreciate it.